So today we have Dr. Ellie Niewood, who is the Vice President of Intelligence and Cross-Cutting Capabilities at the MITRE Corporation. So he is a senior executive working on very difficult DoD problems and leading an amazing team at MITRE, which is a federally funded research and development center. Before his job at MITRE, Ellie served as the division head in the MIT Lincoln Lab Engineering Division. But beyond that, he also was the technical advisor to the director of the Air Force Rapid Capabilities Office, and he spent 3 years as the co-chair of the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board. The Scientific Advisory Board is made up of about 50 national experts advising senior Air Force leaders on how to tackle some of their very difficult problems. He has also served on the Defense Science Board Task Force. He has a bachelor's degree, master's degree, and PhD, all from MIT in the Aeroastro department. And he holds a certificate in leadership for the 21st century from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. So I've known Ellie for many years. He's been a valuable resource to me as I started into leadership in my career. And he's going to give you some great advice. So Ellie is an amazing systems analyst, and that's someone who can really take a complex problem and decompose it into its parts to find, and then synthesize it into a very impactful solution. And he's going to actually go through the exercise of doing a systems analysis on his career to try to give you guys some insights into charting your own course. So Ellie, thank you so much for being here. We're really lucky to have you, and I'll turn it over to you. And students, don't forget, I know you're not shy, put all your questions in the chat. So over to you, Ellie, thanks.
Jen, you want to mention 2 courses?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. And we actually, I will point out that 2 of our courses, embedded security and quantum software, are being taught by instructors from the MITRE Corporation who work for Ellie. So again, we're very grateful for MITRE's support of the BWSI program, continued support over several years.
Right. Great. Thank you, Jen. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. I mean, this is a great opportunity for me. It's been an interesting exercise, I would say, for me to think about, back on my own career and, what does it even mean to do sort of systems analysis of your career. I'll talk a little bit about systems analysis, probably more concretely, than around my career. I'm not sure I've come up with the perfect approach yet. There's still experimentation and work to be done there. Jen did a great job sort of summarizing, my career and my background. I'll touch on it a little bit as I go through the material today. And, as Jen said, and whatever questions you have, I don't know if I'll get to them all, depends on how many there are, but I'll try and answer, questions, towards the end of this meeting. And, I'll say, just touching on, MITRE's support. MITRE is excited as a corporation to be supporting. This is a great effort that Bob and the team at Lincoln and MIT have put together. I think so important, to really help train you all and expose you to the kinds of things you see at BeaverWorks and get you excited about and involved in STEM activities. We are looking to hire all the time, and workforce is critical to us. And so whatever we can do to build that workforce for the future, I mean, really important. For what I do and for what MITRE does. Our motto is solving problems for a safer world. We need problem solvers. And I think that's, what, BeaverWorks and BeaverWorks SI is really all about at the end of the day. So I titled this talk, Systems Analysis of an Engineer's Career, or 8 things I wish I had known, when I was in high school and starting my career. I think I actually got to 9. So maybe the first lesson is, don't get too literal about counting the number. I want to talk a little bit about, what I think of as systems analysis. And again, Jen touched on it a bit, and I'll come back to this as one of the lessons at the end. It's not about a specific technology. It's not, a focus on going deep in some area. It really is, how do you take a complex problem, which you cannot solve, in mass, and break it down into a series of simpler problems that you can take on one at a time. It's about, how do you understand what are the critical parameters that determine answers to questions and focus on those critical parameters and, ignore some of the other things that are maybe less critical. It's about, knowing where to look really in depth and where to not need to look as in depth. And then what does a decision maker need to make a better decision? And I think that's one of the key things we do in systems analysis. One of the things, Bob helped teach me at Lincoln. It's one of the things I've continued to try and teach people here at MITRE. We're trying to help people decide better. And how can we use systems analysis and science and technology and engineering to do that, make better decisions, build better systems, and bring better things to bear. And so, I've always done that in a very technical way. Again, I think for this talk today, I wanted to try and do that around, okay, decisions you are making, what you are thinking about, and how do you, as you embark on your careers, what lessons have I learned that, may help you as you go out into the future? How do I deconstruct my career into a simpler set of things that lead to some very complex result overall? So let me start there. I'll start and I'll try and go somewhat chronological across my career as I do this, with these lessons and when I learned them and how I learned them. But you'll see I jump around. I will jump around a little bit. So Jen mentioned I was in the aeronautics and astronautics department at MIT. I will say even after many years of managing people and doing less engineering over time of my own, I still think of myself, first and foremost. If you ask me what I do, I say I am a rocket scientist. I even have a shirt, with Marvin the Martian that says, actually, I am a rocket scientist. And why is that? How did that start? So when I was a high schooler, probably about the same age as many of you, I was a rising senior. I signed up for a program at the University of Southern California, where about 9 or 10, my students of my age and myself worked for professors in the engineering school there on research projects for 6-7 weeks. So not quite as focused as a Beaver Works Summer Institute class, but I think similar in many ways. And I didn't know what I would be working on. I didn't even know what I was going to study, when I went off to school a year after that. I show up out there, and there's a reception for the students in the program and for the faculty who they would be doing work for. And I'm introduced to the person who I'm told is going to be my faculty advisor. And I'll talk about this a little bit more about, I was a little timid and a little scared at the time. And I'm introduced to this professor. His hair is going all over the place. His shirt is half tucked in, half out. It doesn't look like he really put himself together to come to this fancy reception. And, the piece of cheese he's eating is, half going into his mouth, half on his face. And, I'm not feeling that excited at this point about what I'm going to be doing with him for the summer. And then he goes, Ellie, how would you like to study chaos? And he said it with so much enthusiasm. And he goes on to describe, how he's studying, nonlinear dynamics of simple, equations that, around aerodynamics. And he was so enthusiastic about what he was doing. It clearly meant so much to him, and he had thought so much about it that was just contagious. And it made me incredibly excited to work in that area. And, he was an aerospace engineering professor, and he was doing this work in that department. And I was sold, and I've been sold ever since. And I think it's incredibly important that as you think about, where you want to go to college, what you want to study in college, look, everyone needs, need to make a living or want to make a living and want to find an area where you can do work. And where there will be jobs. But if you can find that in something that is really meaningful to you and exciting to you, it makes such a huge difference. I have good friends who are lawyers, and I don't think this is true of all lawyers, but they just are not excited to go to work in the morning. It's just a job to them that they get through. And I've been, I think, incredibly privileged that, I love to go home at night. I love to see my family and do stuff outside work, but I'm excited to get to work in the morning. And I think it's you will be more successful if you can bring that excitement to bear on what it is you do. And so I think as you think about what you want to do going forward, I think really think about what is it out there that motivates you and makes you want to study that and work in that area. So that, to me, lesson number one, I'll say, of these 8 or 9 lessons that we'll get through. How do you focus your career on things that you find exciting? So that was one aspect of my trip out to California that year. I want to talk about another one, relative to the second lesson that I'll have. So I mentioned that the program was out at University of Southern California. I grew up in New Jersey. I knew no one at USC. I knew no one in this program when I went out there. I think, in fact, I don't think I knew anyone in the city of Los Angeles, let alone maybe even the state of California, when I flew out there. It's come up again. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I only eat kosher food. There was not going to be kosher food at this program. And so I wasn't even sure, what am I going to eat every day when I get out there? And so my parents bought a toaster oven for me and, packed it up, and it went under the plane on the flight out. Get there the first day, go to cook in, quotes, you don't do much cooking in a toaster oven, and the toaster oven doesn't work. And so there was a graduate student who was sort of, our advisor, or, making sure we didn't get into too much trouble. He brings his pocket knife over. We take the toaster oven apart. They were much simpler in those days, right, than they might be today. And there's a loose wire inside. I've never touched anything electrical at this point in my life. He says, you got to get that wire to stay connected to that screw and you'll be all set. I try to get the wire connected to the screw, close it back up, doesn't work, open up, it came loose when I screwed it in, when I put it back together. Do this like 9 or 10 times. Every time I can't get that wire to stick. Finally, one time I put it on, I close it back up, doesn't work. I open it up again, put the screwdriver, on the pocket knife there to get the wire to attach. There's a huge flash of light. I feel current, running through my hand. I pull it away, a big shock. And after that, it worked. I managed to melt the wire to that screw, and the toaster oven worked fine for the rest of the summer. But the whole experience, I'll say, I was scared going out there. I knew this was something that would be great for me to do, but it was not easy. The flight out, I was pretty nervous. I think it's been true throughout my career. And I'll say that second lesson is, embrace change. Take on something that's going to scare you. When you're given 2 choices, what's the choice that makes you more nervous? And I think that's the one you want to make. I'll give another example. Jen mentioned that I ran the engineering division at Lincoln for about 5-6 years. Okay, I'm the one at MIT who we had project lab junior year. They bring you into the machine shop to show you how to use the tools. And after that, hour-long class, the people who ran the machine shop said to me, Ellie, anytime you need to do something with those tools, you tell us and we'll do it for you. Because they knew by the time I was done with that hour that either the tool or I would end up broken if I was the one who had to use it. And that is, my, mechanical engineering ability summed up pretty well. Bob knows this well. At one point, I've been working for Bob for a number of years. It was time for me to do something different at Lincoln. And what I really wanted to do was go off to the division that did mechanical and aerospace engineering, that owned the clean rooms, that owned the machine shops, that did, mechanical fabrication and be involved in that work. I knew that I could not do what those engineers did. I was not at all, sure that I could lead that division in a way that was effective, that they would respect me, because they all built their own air conditioners and they fixed their own cars and they built satellites for a living, and I couldn't do any of that. I will say that was one of the most satisfying and rewarding experiences of my career, was leading, in an area that I did not think I could, be an effective, wasn't sure that I could be an effective leader. Same thing true of coming to MITRE. I'd worked at Lincoln for, 20 odd years. It was time to do something different. And again, they didn't have a job for me at MITRE when I came here. They said, we'll take a chance on you. We'll figure something out. I took a cut in pay. I took a cut in, I'll say prestige or the stature of the role. And now I run all of MITRE's work for the intelligence community and other critical areas. So I guess my message to all of you, embrace change, don't let things get static, and go after things that are scary to you. A third lesson I'll talk about, I'll try to go through some of these a little more quickly. Work on something that matters. When I was a graduate student now, so moving on a little bit chronologically, I went out to the International Electric Propulsion Conference in Italy because I worked on magnetoplasma dynamic thrusters for spacecraft. You don't need to answer aloud. My guess is none of you have heard of magnetoplasma dynamic thrusters. There's a good reason for that. They never worked and never will. I was sitting there at that conference, and I knew that there was no one in that room who knew more about MPD thrusters than I did. But there were only 10 people in the room, and no one else in the world cared at all about what we were doing. I'll fast forward about a month ago. I'm working from home. I have a new baby granddaughter, our first grandkid. So she's visiting with my son and daughter-in-law. So I'm working from home, and I'm on a meeting about nuclear command control and communications. And my granddaughter, my wife is holding her, and she starts to reach out to me. And my wife says, "Gwen, not now. Grandpa is saving the world from nuclear weapons." Now, I don't think literally that meeting is going to save the world. But at the end of the day, working on something like NC3, it just matters a lot more than some of the things that I was doing before. And again, I think very rewarding to be able to have that kind of experience. That's lesson 3, work on something that matters. Lesson 4, I'll say, practice doesn't always make perfect. Bob probably doesn't remember this, but it was very early in my career. The first briefing I was ever going to give to our Air Force sponsors in DC. And you all don't probably realize this, we didn't give briefings on a computer then. I don't even think we had PowerPoint. We had ViewGraph projectors, these big rectangular boxes with a light. You'd put a transparent piece of paper on it, and you'd project something onto a screen. And this was my first briefing. And so I worked with the graphic arts department, and we got slides, the slides printed. And I practiced that briefing for a week, every day, 4 or 5 times. We get down to DC. I put the title chart on the ViewGraph projector, and there's a little smudge by the title. I'm not sure where that came from. I put up the second chart, and now it's not a little smudge. There are about 4 or 5 marks spread across the second chart. By the third chart, it became really clear that the slides were covered with my fingerprints. But I had practiced, with those charts so much that now they were almost black. And not only had I practiced them, but I think I practiced once, right after afternoon snack time when I had a candy bar. And that also became quite evident. The sponsor, my boss, very, very nice about it. I got through it fine. I think I was more embarrassed than they were upset. But I probably shouldn't have practiced it that much. I'll say, I have a staff person who works for me here at MITRE. I obviously won't mention his name. Incredible knowledge of the field that he's working in, which is command and control. And sometimes he'll give briefings, though, that are just terrible. And I realized once it's because he had a script and he was almost reading from that script. And when I tell them, John Doe, don't do that. Pick someone in the audience and talk to them and have a conversation with them. He gives these incredible briefings that he just gave one at a conference, and we've gotten like 50 emails. That was the best briefing at this conference. And, I think incredibly important as all of you, move forward and create, to be able to describe your work and present it and tell people about what you're doing. Those are skills you need to have and can make a huge difference. So again, I think it may not seem that important now, but how you do that and not practicing it too much, but really just, speaking, I think an important lesson that I learned. One that came to me a little later, and my wife, who some of you may be having dinner with tomorrow, I think summed this up much better than I can. She says, people don't leave bad jobs, people leave bad bosses. And finding good bosses, Bob, one of mine, for a long time, I think it's really what you want to look for as you look, even beyond college, but even for faculty, what advisor do you want to do research on for college? It's just as important to find a good advisor as it is to find a good research topic. I worked for someone at Lincoln for a while who someone told me, oh, you don't want to work for that person. When I get to work at 8, he's got his feet up on his desk, he's reading his newspaper. He doesn't work that hard. That's not who you want to work for. But I ended up working for him. He was one of the best supervisors I ever had because his whole approach was, how does he empower the people who work for him to do more and to reach their full potential? And he got things out of people. He had people who started working, had not been successful to date in their careers, and they just blossomed under him. And so finding that kind of advisor, supervisor, boss, again, I think something incredibly important. I also learned the reason he was reading that newspaper at 8 o'clock was because he got to work at 6 a.m. And that was his break after he'd already been there for 2 hours. And so, there was not a sign that he did not work that hard. Another thing I think, important for all of you, one thing I've learned is, even outside work, but certainly as you bring yourself to school to work, I'll say, have beliefs, stick to them, take pride in them. Again, I mentioned I'm an Orthodox Jew. I only eat kosher food. It also means that I leave work before sundown on Friday. I need to be home by sundown on Friday, a little before sundown, because my Sabbath starts then. I don't drive, I don't work. Even there are holidays, during the year. It's not only from Friday night, Friday afternoon to Saturday night. I was, sort of early on in my career, I had made that clear. People saw me leave. One week we had a real fire drill going on. We had gotten a stack of paper plots about characteristics of aircraft that we could not get for various reasons electronically. We only had them on paper, and the sponsor needed them in digital form within a week. And I was the one who figured out how we were going to scan them in, translate from the scanned version into actual plots and numbers, and get them back to him. And so I didn't realize it's Friday afternoon. I'm sitting there, by hand, tracing things on the screen and then manipulating the data. My boss comes up to me, puts a hand on my shoulder and says, I think you need to go now. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And then I looked at the clock and I realized he's looking out for me. He knows what matters to me. And he's saying, you should go. You'll do this later. We'll do this next week. We'll find someone else to do this. And I was incredibly appreciative to him of that. And I realized, it was because I'd always been clear about what mattered to me, what my limits were, where I would go, where I wouldn't. I know I'm running a little long. Let me maybe end with one more lesson. And I'll say around diversity and inclusion. I sat on a panel once at Lincoln. We had a day about diversity inclusion. They wanted a panel of leaders. I'm on the panel, and I say, look, I think it's incredibly important that we have this focus on diversity inclusion because it matters for others who are here. We need to show that. And I made it clear I didn't think of myself as being part of that. I didn't. And a woman on the panel says, Ellie, I always think of you as part of who we're being diverse for. Diversity inclusion, they're good things. I mean, I think it's an innate good, but I think even more important, we all have biases. They get in the way of us doing our work. They get in the way of us finding the best people for a job. I work in national security. We can only hire US citizens. The pool that we can draw from, we start out with it being somewhat limited. And as I mentioned, we are always looking for good people. If we rule out some fraction of the workforce because we can't recognize, their capabilities because they look different than us, we will not succeed. And if those people, people of color or women or people who are minority in any other way don't think that they'll be comfortable, working for us, that they won't be included, and we lose out on being able to hire them, again, I think incredibly impactful on our ability to be successful. And so I think for all of you, again, the lesson I push is, reach out, try to understand what those unconscious biases that you bring to the table are. We all have them. I have them, conscious, unconscious. And what can you do to make the environments that you are in, the environments that you're working in, more inclusive of others, and bring everyone's talents and skills to bear. So let me pause there, and stop for questions. I have one or two more lessons, we can get to if there's time, but I wanted to give you all a chance to reach out and to ask questions.
All right, we do have some questions. Why don't we start with Anthony Wang?
Yeah, hello. Nice to meet you. So I think your talk was very insightful and had a lot of very good points. One of them, or one of the stories I was particularly interested in, was your one about the really good supervisor. And so I was just kind of curious, what were some defining traits or leadership tendencies that you found in that supervisor, maybe that you adopted yourself as your career went on? And
Yeah.
which do you think are the most important or influential?
Yeah. So I would say, for this person in particular, I do think it was his ability to empower people, right? He wasn't trying to get everyone to do things his way. He was trying to understand what each person brought to the table and how he could help them leverage that. And then he had their backs, right? He made clear that, if problems arose, he stood up and said, the problem is here. He took that on himself. So that gave those people freedom to take risks, and to, and to bring their best to bear. That I thought was incredible. I learned a lot from that. People sometimes ask me, what's my management style? And I think my management style is, sort of an amalgam of 10 or 15 people's different styles. Both, mostly people I've learned good things from. Every now and then something I'm like, I'm not going to do that because someone did that to me, and I'm never going to do that to someone else. I think another thing to think about is, ask people who've worked for that person, right? I mean, I think, don't be shy, right? I mean, I think this is incredibly important as you go off to school, not just what classes take. It's not as big a deal in a class, but if you're going to do a research project for someone, what did that advisor do for the other people that worked for him? What did they get out of it? How did he help them? How did she help them? I think, don't ignore the opportunities to learn more than you can see on your own. Does that help?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Okay, Akshata?
Okay, so I actually had a question about your switch from like technical engineering pursuits to a leadership position. I remember you mentioned that you actually made that switch. And I was wondering, did you find yourself using any of your technical skills to help you in your position of leadership? And how was the switch?
Yeah, yeah, and I would say, look, it's not one day I showed up at work and I stopped doing engineering and I started doing leadership. It's been much more gradual over time. I had to put together. I have a new boss, and I had to put together a development plan for him. And what are the things I want to do? And I talked about what I want to do next. And I said, but 5 years after that, I want to go back to doing technical work and being an individual contributor or lead a small team, because I would like to get back to, the engineering is what I love. And it's great to help other people and empower them, and help other people do that kind of work. But I do want to go back to doing it hands-on myself at some point before I'm done. So, for me, the switch was gradual over time. It started with, having 2 or 3 people working for me on a project, which at first was very challenging, right? Because they couldn't do the work as fast as I could. And I knew that. But 2 or 3 of them could get a lot more done than I could. And so that was really hard to not dive in and do it for them or tell them exactly what to do or give them a list of 10 things to do today, to just say, okay, I want you to do X. And, so that was really where it started. All the way to, I remember sitting at a conference that I used to present and give briefings at, and I wasn't presenting anymore, but there were 10 of those briefings that I helped those people shape. And I realized, that was great. I mean, that was a great feeling that I had, that I didn't do this, I helped them do that. And, so that was another step in that transition. Now I have like 800 people who work for me. I can't help them individually the way that I, used to. I help other people help them. And so I think I've taken those steps throughout my career. It was never like a single transition. It's been more like a slow and gradual shift. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Sure.
That's great. How about Chris Gu?
Hi. Yeah, great points that you made. Really appreciate them. Your last point, you talk about diversity. And, throughout your talk, I've noticed that you talk about your identity, like you're identifying as being Jewish across the several points that you made. So I'm wondering, does your identity help you as an engineer? Does being an engineer resonate within your identity? And how do these 2 major facets of your life interact with each other? And I've made this question general so you can have some flexibility with that.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely, I will say, aspects of my identity, and my Jewish identity that impact on, my engineering skill. I mean, look, some of it is just, my parents' sort of dedication to learning and books and reading, right? It is to some extent a cultural, thing, within Jewish, society, and that's been a big deal. I spent, I went to Jewish day schools, for elementary school and for high school. And, you spend hours, studying the Talmud, which is like this, 1,000-year-old Aramaic, arguments between rabbis. I mean, I don't know how to describe it other than that. And, learning sort of the logic and being able to follow that is definitely, how you take a complex problem and break it down. There is overlap there. I mean, I think I learned my systems analysis skills, in the, Jewish day schools that I went to. So that's certainly an aspect. I will say, and I think, true of lots of cultures, right, focus on, family and relationships and what's important. You bring some of that to work with you, right? I mean, I think, you treat other people to some extent in that, in those same ways. And so I think maybe more as a manager than as an engineer, I think those, traits have been very helpful to me. Yeah, I think those are some of, sort of the big interactions. And I think, it's also just having something that defines you. right? Whatever your identity is, I think it's important to be able to maintain that and gives you, I think, self-confidence and assurance that is very important in your career.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So I'm going to skip a little bit out of order and follow with that theme. Akshay, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. First of all, thank you for this talk. It's been really insightful. I was just wondering, at the beginning of your career, how do you, I guess when you don't have a lot of credibility and you don't have a lot of experience, how do you still assert your values about your identity, especially like if you're like a minority? Because at that point, is it better to put your values slightly on the back burner and focus on building up your credibility? Or is it, better to just assert your values from day one and be really strong about that?
So I think better to assert your values from day one. I don't think I had, the kind of credibility that you're talking about, when I started. I'll say, look, I made clear that I would do whatever I could so that they didn't get in the way of work, right? It wasn't like I came in and said, here are my rules and thank you very much, I'm going home. It was okay, if that means, because I'm leaving early Friday, I need to work later on Thursday, I would do that, right? One of the things, I'm quite an introvert, when you can't eat with everyone else, going out to dinner really becomes hard. But I went out, I ate that green salad, or I brought my own food or whatever, because it was important, the social aspects of work also matter. So I would always stick to your values. I think, if anything, if you don't, people will assume you don't care and they will take advantage of that, later in your career. So, find allies, find people who, even if they aren't of the same, minority or, same identity as you, who want to be supportive of that. Those people are out there. And if you're working somewhere where they aren't comfortable with that, maybe you're in the wrong place, right? I mean, Lincoln, was always very good about that from the time I started there. It was clear people were, accepting of that. I mean, wasn't great about diversity in some ways. It's gotten a lot better. But if you stood up for yourself, people really respected that. And I think you gain credibility by showing that it matters to you and you're willing to make sacrifices for it.
Thank you.
That's great, Ellie. Kitty, you have a question about managing change?
Yes, definitely. So thank you so much for those incredibly insightful lessons. Just a lot of them spoke to me personally, and it has been really helpful to hear your own unique story. So I just want to ask, throughout your own career, how did you exactly go about selecting the transformative steps that you wish to proceed with? Like even among a sea of like options that you have, perhaps? And how did you know or just recognize that those choices were the best for you? Like, just sort of retrospectively speaking. And sorry. And also just what was the process of just stepping out of your comfort zone, and how did that exactly look like for you?
Yeah. So look, I don't think I've always made the right choice, right? I don't think any of us do, right? There is no way to know, when you make that decision, what's the right decision, right? I do not have a magic answer for that for you. And I've made good decisions. I've made bad decisions. I think, look, I probably stayed in one place and did the same thing for too long a couple times. And, it's interesting because I think as you rise up in an organization, it gets harder to move around in some ways because, there's fewer opportunities at the level you may be at. As I talked about at the beginning, I will say, one thing I feel like I've learned is, take the choice that makes you nervous. Right. I mean, not if it's nervous because you think it might be a terrible place to work, but if it makes you nervous because it's testing you in ways that you otherwise might not be, that to me has always been an indicator of, what choice I should make. Other aspects of your question. Yeah. So like I said, I think doing that, I think, sort of imagining yourself, 2-3 years down the road, what do you look like if you go down path A? What do you look like if you go down path B? And how does it feel, right? Does it feel like you'll be somewhere you want to be? That's I think, another important one. I think the other thing is, look, don't plan your career 30 years from now, right? It's really hard to know what's going to come up. I think you want to think about what comes next and how does, that particular, what are you going to get out of that? I never sat down and said, oh, if I want to be the vice president of intelligence at MITRE, here's what I need to do. I had no idea I would be doing this until someone called me up a day before and said, this is your new job. I think, when you make a choice, make the choice based on what's right in front of you, right? What are you going to get out of that? What are you going to learn from it? How is it going to help you grow? And pick based on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just realized that I never actually looked at a lot of things like that. So thank you.
Sure.
Great. Okay, I think we're going to switch. The students want a little bit of your insight in applying to college. So why don't we start with Aiden Carrier?
Okay. I do not know which question was this.
You had a question about research opportunities, positioning
I think I
for
found
college.
it. So what's the best steps or opportunities, etc., that I should pursue, such as like research programs, in order to get into high-end colleges and like research programs and companies like yours?
Yeah. So let me take the easier part of that, which is, to one day work for a company like MITRE. I think it's really about the opportunities you take advantage of in college, right? So, finding good summer internships or good summer jobs. We very much focus on, classwork is great, but what has someone learned outside the classroom? What opportunities do you have to do research, in college, or, to get involved in projects? Outside, again, sort of classwork, right? I mean, you may have a, project-based classes. That's great. Again, I think that's really good experience to have. But we're really looking for what people have done sort of outside of their standard curriculum, and how does that align with the things we do and things we're interested in. In terms of getting into college, it's been a while since I applied to college. I was talking to Bob and Jen and others before. What's closer to me is when my kids applied to college and, went to, my son went to MIT, my daughter went to University of Pennsylvania. That was an incredibly painful experience, the whole application process, and, nerve-wracking. I do think, look, a lot of it just about, getting good grades. I mean, I think that's a big part of it. I think, but whatever you can do to show that you care about some things, and there are things that, excite you and that you want to be involved in, I think that's, a part of what, universities are looking for. They're looking for people who are going to, be really contribute to the community, to that, college, university community in significant ways. So I think whatever you can do to have those kinds of experience and show those things, I think that's great. I'll say the other thing is, look, my sense is, and again, from the, like I said, very nerve-wracking experience of watching my own kids apply, it's much worse than applying for yourself, both because it's harder to get in today than it was because it's different watching someone else go through yourself. Is there's a lot of colleges and universities where you can be happy and successful and learn the things that you need to learn. And I do think, the incredible focus on, get into this school, get into that school, I'm not sure who that's helping other than colleges and their statistics in the US News report. So again, where is it going to make you happy to go, and where are you going to be able to learn the things you want to learn? I think that's really important to focus on.
That's great advice. Okay, switching gears again. Adarsh, you had a question about tips for leadership that you can put into practice.
Thanks for this opportunity, and thanks for your talk again. I was just wondering, as someone who's assuming a leadership position in my local robotics team, what advice would you give to me and other people like me to turn the ideals you've given to us into practice?
Yeah, so I do think a couple of things. I will say, as a leader, think big, right? What are the goals you're setting for the team, that are inspiring and aspirational? And I think often it's a leader's job, maybe more at my level than leading a robotics team, but, to set that vision and direction. I will say the other thing, as I mentioned that I learned from, is what does everyone on the team bring to that team? And how are you going to get, the best of what they have to offer, right? What are their skills? What's the role that's right for them, right? Who should do the programming? Who should build the test track? I don't know, who is the one, to bring the whole team together and help make decisions. And I think seeing each team member for who they are and what they have to offer, and then how do you fit those pieces together to make a strong team? That's not easy. I can't tell you exactly how to do that, but I think that's the kind of thing you want to do. And, knowing when to lead and when to push, right? Or when to help others. I think that's hard, but I think another thing you want to be thinking about in those experiences.
Thank you for the advice. I'll make sure to keep it in mind.
Sure.
All right, Ellie, so I'm going to ask a question that's maybe a little leading because I know you. You've talked to the students about having doing things that are very high impact. Can you maybe tell them a little bit? I mean, so you have a lot of high impact projects in your background. How did you find them? What are they?
Yeah. So I'll give the most recent experiences, which I think I have to think a little bit about how to translate to where a student is in their career right now. But, I came to MITRE because I thought I think of MITRE as a place that can help the government really get out of its own way. Lincoln does incredible technology development. If you want, Lincoln is a place to be, to build a satellite, to do signal processing, design a radar system. MITRE has this incredible breadth across the government and incredible ability to sort of work with the government to, direct them. And so, to me, it was, I was down in DC, in the Pentagon a couple times a week, sort of bashing my head against the wall because they can't get anything done. And so I'm like, well, who could fix that? Where's there a place where they could, potentially make a difference there? And looked around and was like, okay, I think that's MITRE. And then I'm like, okay, well, but they don't have a job for me. Am I willing to take a risk and go there in the chance that I can help make that happen? So I think a piece of it is, first you have to recognize a problem, where that opportunity might be, and then put yourself somewhere where there are the tools and there is the ability to get after that. And so, that's why, we're trying to help the government figure out what a next generation of nuclear command and control looks like. We're trying to help the government understand how to do command and control across different services and different, air and space and land, and bring them all together because we can see those problems and we have something to offer. I think it is a matter of, taking a step back and looking where are those high impact opportunities and what role can, what do you have to offer to help there?
It's fantastic. Okay, so thank you very much, Ellie, for your wonderful talk. We have 3 students that we'd like to call up now. Sarah Nazar, Diptanshu Sikdar, and Shahul Muju. And they'd like to say a few words to you.
Great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Niewood, for your talk. And I learned so much from your stories and your advice. I think my favorite piece of advice that I'm going to take with me is having beliefs and sticking with them throughout your career. And so as a token of our appreciation, I'd like to present to you with this virtual t-shirt. With that, I'd like to hand off to Diptanshu and Shahul.
Thank you.
Okay, hello, Dr. Niewood. Thank you so much for such an inspiring and interesting talk about the important lessons that we should learn as we begin our engineering careers. And I especially connected with your story on leadership at MITRE and working with your excellent boss to achieve the most growth. So as a show of appreciation, I would also like to present you with a virtual t-shirt. And once again, thank you for your wonderful advices that will help us guide in our careers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Niewood. That was a really interesting story, and your experiences I really liked them. It was interesting to hear your advice about jobs and decision making. And yeah, here's your t-shirt.
Thanks.
Ellie, since we have a couple more minutes, if you didn't finish all your 9 lessons, maybe you can cover them shortly for the completeness.
Sure. I think one I touched on, during the question and answers, which is, and I think comes back to the question about leadership, which is, around enabling others, right? That it's so rewarding to have a team do something, that you've helped make them happen. It's great to do stuff yourself. I mean, incredible satisfaction when you build something, when you get something to work, when, you solve a problem on a problem set that was really hard. But it's even more satisfying when you help other people get there. And so, how you can help, others, how you enable others, I find incredibly rewarding. And then, I think the last one really, really coming back to, the systems analysis piece that, I'm sure all of you getting incredible things out of the, the classes that you're taking, the projects you're part of it in terms of BeaverWorks, whether it's cybersecurity or, autonomous race cars, all those things. But I think to really pay attention to what you most get out of them is not how to build that race car. It's how to attack a project. It's, what can you do? It's how do you understand when there's a problem and you debug the software or you test the race car, to figure out what's not going on. The whole approach that you bring to it, I think is much more valuable than any one specific thing that you learn, right? I mean, there's a saying, right? Everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. I don't think that's really true. But again, you need basic skills, right? I mean, you need to be able to do science. You need to be able to do math. You need to be able to program a computer. But the way you learn to think, I find it is the most important thing you learn. And one of the things I loved about the aeroastro department at MIT, again, we learned aerodynamics, we learned rocket propulsion, we learned structural mechanics, but mostly we learned systems engineering. We learned how to figure out, what was needed to solve a problem, and then, look up how to do that. Again, Bob, knows. I mean, one of my early supervisors at Lincoln used to say, once you tell me what the X and Y axes of the plot are, the rest is easy. That's the hard part, right? What do you need to pay attention to? Learning how to do that, I think, is the most important thing you learn as part of these projects at BeaverWorks. I mean, I think that project-based learning, as Bob pointed out, a great way to get that. I think that's really what you want to focus on in high school and college and graduate school if you go there. I still use a lot of things that I learned in graduate school, even though I haven't done numerical modeling of electric propulsion since I left MIT. Yeah, so I think those were my other 2 lessons.
That's fantastic. Any last questions for Ellie?
Dr. Niewood?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had one question that I was really curious if you could answer because it's a little bit funny.
Sure. Yeah.
So to lead an engineering team, do you need to be an engineer yourself, or do you think you could do what you do without your technical background?
So I could not do what I do without my technical background. I think the ability to to interact with people technically, to judge who's strong or who's not technically, are certainly key to how I lead and manage. But I'll say, and at Lincoln, I think all leaders at Lincoln, I think incredibly strong technically. That's not the case at MITRE. And I've met some people now I think it's opened my eyes a little bit. There are ways to do it, even when you don't have that strong, but it's much harder. And certainly I could not do that. I don't have the skills to do it, if it wasn't for the sort of technical approach I bring to everything.
So not impossible, but just much harder.
Not impossible, no, but I think much harder.
So, all right, there is some interest in hearing stories about Bob, but rather than go through that, since you have worked with Bob, what would you say is your favorite hat or shoes that you've seen Bob wear? Bob is known very well for his hats.
Yeah, there were the white shoes that he used to wear to work that, looked incredibly uncomfortable, but also just like really stood out, right? In a sea of black and brown, there was Bob with his white shoes. I think he could have, this was when Bob still interacted with sponsors and, the rest of us were in our suits and ties, he can relax a little bit now. But he was willing to get, be expressive
Part
of
of his
true
identity,
self.
right? Being
Yeah.
true to his identity.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ellie, for spending time with the students today. Your talk was excellent, and these pieces of advice are definitely spot on.
Thanks to all of you. I really enjoyed it.
Everyone can unmute. Give it a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pause.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.